Today we'll be talking about variable casting. So imagine we have some toys, or imagine you have some toys. Okay, so we have, and then we can represent them as like these boxes here. Okay. Okay. Now, so we have these toys, and let's just say the ones in purple. So these are cars, these are action figures. Okay, and let's just say that these are teddy bears. Teddy bears. Now, if you wanted to play a game relating to cars, what we need essentially all of the toys that are cars. Okay, so imagine we had this racetrack and we wanted to play with this racetrack. We need all of our cars. Okay, now if you wanted more than just for example here, than the two cars that we have here, what we would need to do is we would need to convert, for example, these action figures, or we would need to convert these teddy bears into cars. Okay, and then once they become cars, we can now use them in our new game. Okay, and this is what essentially typecasting is in Python, when we are changing the variable type from, for example, integers to maybe floats. Okay, so let's see how this is done. So let's just say we have a string. Okay, so it's called my number. Okay, so this string, just make this a bit clearer, my number is equal to 15. Okay, but it's a string, so it's a string because it has these quotes, but it's 15 but in text form. And we had my number 2, which is 25. Now, what happens is if we wanted to add these two numbers together, so my number plus my number 2. So if you wanted to add them together, then this is how we would do it. So it would be my number plus my number 2, and that would give you the answers. That would give you the numbers added together. And hopefully we would get 15 plus 25 is 40. So hopefully we would get 40. Okay? But because it's a string, it's going to have these quotes because these are strings. Okay? But in Python, this doesn't work. This is not the case. Because instead of getting 40, what we get instead is we get 1525. Okay, and the reason is because these two have essentially been added together. Okay, so the 15 as a string gets added to the 25 as a string, and it makes 1525 as a string. So if you want to calculate the number correctly, what we need to do is we need to convert it. Like with our example with the toy cars and the action figures and the teddy bears, we need to convert this. We need to convert my number and my number 2 to be integers or floats, because we are working with numbers and we are trying to calculate the sum of the two numbers. So what we would do is we can use put this as a different color, the int function. Okay, and because it's a function, we have these brackets. And what we can do is we can pass in, make sure there's enough room. And now what we can do is we can now put in these values here, and the int function will convert these to numbers. So we could have my number here, and then my number 2. And as a result, these two numbers here, but they're represented as strings because of these quotes, these get converted to essentially, so this would become 15 and this would become 25. Okay, and as a result, we would get the correct answer of 40. But this would be integer. Okay, as you can see, there's no quotes here. The same thing applies if you were to call the float function instead. Okay, so let's leave enough room here. So now what we can do is you can type, so we can just pass in my number like before. And now, instead of us getting 15, like we got here, and 25, what happens is that we get 15.0 and 25.0, and that will equal 40.0 because we converted it to a float instead. Okay? The same applies if we wanted to convert from an integer to a string. Okay, in order to do this, what we will need to do is we would need to pass in whatever value we wanted to convert to a string into the str function. And if we wanted to convert, I don't know, an integer, a float into a boolean, what we would need to do is we would need to, just for the sake of this example, to a boolean, we would call on bool instead. Whatever we want to convert would be inside of these brackets. Okay, so just ensure that they're inside. Okay, now let's see an example in Replit. So let's just say, so what we have here is integer. So let's call this my number. Let's make sure the spelling is correct. My number is equal to 15. Okay, and my number 2 is equal to 25. Now I just want to show you what happens if we were to add these two together, just to show you that. So my number plus my number 2. Okay, now if you were to click run, as you can see, we get 1525, but this is not what we want. Okay, so what we need to do is we need to wrap this with our int function. Okay, so now once we've wrapped this with our int function, as you can see, if we were to run it now, we'll get 40. Fantastic. Now let's change this to be float instead, and I want to show you what happens if you were to change this to float. So if you were to run it now, as you can see, we get 40.0 as expected. So this is how we would convert it. So notice how I have converted my number to an integer on line 4, but you can also do the same. Maybe you want to do it on line 1 instead. So here we can just use the int function here instead, and it will do the same thing. Okay. Thanks for watching.